$2.5 trillion. This is not a typo in a financial report, nor is it the total GDP of a developing nation. This is the massive amount of money that is completely missing right inside the Pentagon. The U.S. Department of Defense, the military institution with the largest budget and the most power globally, has failed its audit for 8 consecutive years. No organization, no individual can accurately explain where trillions of taxpayer dollars have vanished to. However, a paradox is unfolding. Not a single politician is speaking out to demand the shutdown or budget cuts of the Pentagon. In stark contrast to that leniency, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, led by billionaire Elon Musk, has just decided to wipe out the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, in less than 72 hours. The justification given for this decision is waste, fraud, and abuse. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we will dive deep into analyzing one of the biggest contradictions in current budget management policies. Through the latest congressional hearing, we will see how Representative Jared Moskowitz exposed this double standard using irrefutable arguments right on live television. The core of the debate revolves around the argument from the pro-USAID shutdown faction. The representative witness, Mr. Kaplan, tried to defend the view that because waste and fraud exist in USAID, this agency must be eliminated. However, Representative Jared Moskowitz applied a classic interrogation tactic, establishing a common premise that the opponent cannot deny, then applying that very premise to a larger frame of reference. To point out the contradiction, let's watch how he cornered the witness.
Assume you would agree that in a $7 trillion budget, we could probably find, in fact, we have found waste, fraud, and abuse in every department, right?
That's why you have inspectors general to root it out.
That's right. So there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon, right?
Correct.
And there's waste, fraud, and abuse in DHS.
Yes.
In fact, we just saw the other day.
The witness was forced to admit an obvious truth. In a massive government system with a $7 trillion budget, waste exists in every department and agency. Once this consensus was established, Moskowitz immediately delivered the decisive logical blow to expose the absurdity in the opposing faction's policy.
No one's talking about getting rid of the Pentagon just because there's waste, fraud, and abuse, right? That would be unreasonable, Mr. Kaplan. You agree?
No one's talking about getting rid of those agencies.
Right, of course, right? So it would be, and that's where the disconnect is here.
The contradiction was clearly exposed. Discovering waste in a government agency requires lawmakers to enhance oversight, auditing, and process optimization. It absolutely does not mean dismantling an entire institution with critical national functions. The decision to wipe out USAID was clearly not based on objective financial standards, but heavily tinged with political calculations. To objectively evaluate the concept of waste in the government apparatus, we need to compare it with agencies currently enjoying special protection mechanisms. Take the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, under the administration of Kristi Noem as an example. This agency just spent up to $200 million in budget funds solely on an advertising campaign. Economically speaking, this $200 million figure exceeds the production budget of Hollywood's biggest blockbuster film projects like Jurassic Park or Barbie. More importantly, this expensive campaign brought no commensurate practical benefits, yet absolutely no firing orders or proposals to shut down DHS were issued. Similarly, the $9 billion welfare fraud scandal involving the immigration agency ICE in Minnesota also faded into silence. Returning to the epicenter of waste, Representative Moskowitz announced figures that dealt a direct blow to the budget-saving argument.
I'm Kristi Noem, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security. Thank you, President Donald J. Trump, for securing our border, for deporting criminal illegal immigrants, and for putting America first. President Trump has a clear message for those that are in our country illegally. Leave now. If you don't, we will find you, and we will deport you. You will never return. For too long, weak politicians left our borders wide open. They flooded our communities with drugs, human trafficking, and violent criminals. They put American lives at risk. Well, those days are over. If you leave now, you may have an opportunity to return and enjoy our freedom and live the American dream.
functions, obviously. The Pentagon, we're not getting rid of the Pentagon, even though they haven't been able to pass an audit 8 years in a row. There's over $2.5 trillion, let me say that again, over $2.5 trillion missing in the Pentagon, like real money, okay? And no one's talking about getting rid of it. And so, you know,
the Pentagon shopping list is the clearest evidence of a lack of control. $9 million for king crab legs served at parties, $220 million for furniture upgrades, and $100,000 for a Steinway piano, while billions of dollars are being squandered on absurd items in the military. USAID, the agency responsible for providing humanitarian aid, food, and preventing global pandemic disasters, is stripped of its right to operate. The big question is, how did the Doge organization and Elon Musk react to this $2.5 trillion loss? The answer is absolute silence. There were no surprise inspections, no media campaigns, and no budget freezing orders targeted at the Department of Defense. The Pentagon failing its audit is not a temporary accounting accident. It is a systemic issue that has persisted for decades, turning this agency into a black hole, swallowing the national budget with the backing of military-industrial contractors. We have seen reports of the military buying cheap screws or metal washers at prices inflated to thousands of dollars. Large-scale weapons development projects constantly exceed their budget ceilings by dozens of times compared to initial estimates, only to be eventually canceled for failing to meet technical requirements. For an agency to lose an amount equivalent to the GDP of an economic powerhouse, yet still regularly get budget increases approved by Congress every year, sets an extremely dangerous precedent for public administration. Doge's bias and silence regarding the Pentagon can be logically explained when we examine the issue of conflict of interest. SpaceX, the space technology corporation owned by Elon Musk, is also one of the U.S. government's largest defense contractors. SpaceX's massive revenue stream depends directly on multi-billion-dollar contracts signed with the Pentagon and national security agencies. In terms of governance principles, handing over control and government budget-cutting authority to an individual whose financial interests are tied to America's largest spending agency is a profound contradiction. Doge cannot and will never target the Department of Defense. Instead, they pivot to agencies without a powerful lobbying force, agencies that don't spend on weapons, like USAID. Shutting down USAID creates a superficial media effect of saving the budget while completely dodging the core of the real waste. The decision to eliminate USAID does not solve the waste problem. On the contrary, it creates a more severe governance risk. When USAID ceases operations, its entire project portfolio and executive functions are hastily transferred to the state department. In the hearing, Representative Moskowitz pointed directly at this fatal flaw and forced the witness to acknowledge the reality.
With you. But do you now think that now that that is all moved over to the State Department, do they need more resources to limit the fraud, waste, and abuse? Because otherwise, aren't we going to wind up in the same situation where there's going to be fraud, waste, and abuse because we're not investing in that oversight?
Maximum oversight is essential, and that's what we brought as the IG for USAID. And when you have billions going out in complex emergency environments and money spent overseas in areas controlled by terrorist organizations and any armed group, you need adequate staffing, people, good monitoring, and an effective IG to oversee and investigate any misuse of those funds.
Restructuring functions without accompanied proportional oversight resources and personnel is a perfect recipe for financial loss. Without specialized inspection mechanisms like those USAID previously established, billion-dollar funds in complex environments will easily become targets for criminal or terrorist organizations. This fraud-cutting policy, in reality, is opening up a massive management void that threatens to make the abuse even worse. Besides the financial risks, the most devastating consequence of shutting down USAID lies on the geopolitical chessboard. Populist rhetoric frequently questions why we should send foreign aid. However, experts and strategic analysts understand clearly USAID is the United States' paramount tool for exercising soft power. Infrastructure, healthcare, and educational support programs in developing nations are not just humanitarian. They are the means by which the United States establishes its sphere of influence and secures access to strategic resources and maintains a global network of allies. This is a measure to protect national security from afar at a much cheaper cost than military intervention. When Washington decides to retreat and leave a vacuum in critical regions, rival powers like China and Russia will immediately step in to fill that position. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road, Beijing is ready to provide massive capital to seize the geopolitical control that the U.S. has just voluntarily relinquished. This is not a step back to save money. This is a strategic surrender that severely harms the United States' global leadership position in the long run. The figure of $2.5 trillion is not merely a loophole in accounting books. It is a stark testament to a misplaced system of priorities. If managed and utilized transparently, the massive wealth missing at the Pentagon could solve a series of lingering domestic crises. It is more than enough to cover the entire cost of free healthcare for every American citizen for a year, maintain the Social Security system for the elderly for decades, or completely erase the student loan burden for an entire generation. It is ironic that the voices demanding to cut off aid to the most vulnerable communities are the exact same people who remain completely silent about the multi-trillion-dollar losses by the military-industrial elite. And more worryingly, they continue to push proposals to grant hundreds of billions more in budget for new conflict risks. Financial transparency cannot just be a weaponized tool to take down political opponents or vulnerable agencies. Auditing rules must be applied uniformly, especially to the sectors that consume the most taxpayer money. Thank you for tuning in to today's analysis. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments section, hit like, and subscribe to the channel to continue joining us in decoding the hidden corners of global politics and economics. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.